Hello and welcome back to the show. This is the first one for the new year, so happy 2018. Hopefully I get to do a show at least a couple times a week this year. The plan is to do the Fuse shows and keep doing the Leaf shows, so this should be good. Today I'll be doing revisiting our Dice app. Now let me take a quick look at what the Dice app looks like. We did this one before. I'm going to minimize this so it gets out of the way. And we have these little dice where you can edit them. And these are from the Dark Souls game, and I can show you again with the basic one. If we change this, remove this one, we add a normal die, say D10. What we have here is we have the expected value of these two dice. If you roll both of them, the average value would be 9. Expected value then is just the average value in this case. And that'll be 9. And these are ones for the Dark Souls, they had different ones. I was going to add Arcadia Quest today, but I thought instead I would do serialization of the data because it's a bit annoying that every time we make these changes, we lose them. And so anytime we add an item, we want to keep it around. So modifiers, modify, add values to it. So what today is we'll be doing serialization. And what that means is we're going to save everything to a file. And this file would be on the mobile device. I'll just do it on desktop now. And then when they reload it, it'll come back up. This is obviously extremely important for mobile because people come and go from the applications all the time. So that's where we're at. We have this. And for those of you that don't know who I am, I'm edA-qa mort-ora-y. I'm one of the developers at Fuse. I do the programming a lot for the layout, animation, and working on the state system and a lot of things to do with actual high-level app development. I'll be using some of the code today that some of my colleagues did most of the work on, and that's the file system. And the API is really simple, so we don't have to see too much of it. And it's always pleasant to have a nice simple API, but you know, as a programmer, you'd like to show more. But the API is very simple. So let's get started on that today. I've already prepared a little bit in advance, just so I didn't have to stumble through the very basics. As you can see in my file, in the state file, I am requiring the file system. I'm going to load this up. Now I know there's a ES6 import way to do this, but I'm sticking with what was in the docs for now. If you care to tell me what the import is, I think it's an import star somehow again, but I'm going to stick with require for now. It doesn't make a big difference in the way we use it. And what I've done is I have a save and a load data function. And I'll show you, if you notice on the main screen, I have these little debug items for now to force saving and loading. So let me show you where those are. They're in the view, and the view has just a little debug panel, I call it. And if we're not doing debugging, we're going to have a little flag, a compilation probably flag that says get rid of this. So during development, keep this, and otherwise will go away. This will actually go away now as well, but while developing serialization, you really want a way that you can quickly save and load just to see that it's actually working. And I can show you that it's not quite working right now. So if I do a save, saving works fine. And it's supposed to save something. And loading. Okay, and loading, apparently save might not be working, but loading does. Save must have worked once, and loading, you see it cleared these dice out. I didn't actually do much work in advance. I did just the bare minimum to show that we have some sort of saving. And that's coming when you press load. There's a load data function, and it writes loading to the console. Loading. And saving probably worked too. I just removed the message, so let's put that back in. Saving this.save path. Now when I save this, you'll notice it reloads over in the preview. And this is actually one of the reasons why you might want to very early implement some serialization in your app, because as we have to reload some things, your data is going to disappear. We do some state migration, but not always. And the load data is something I call in the constructor of the main state, I call load data in here. And I should probably do this right at the end instead, but these are very standard anyway, so they're static. And so as you're reloading, you want to keep in the basic state, and that's probably okay. And there's lifecycle commands, and we'll get to them later. But let's go down to what load data does. Ignoring save first. Actually, let's look at save first, because it's a lot easier to understand. Saving, I just give it a save path. The path comes from up here. And I'm using the file system data directory. This is basically the default place you store stuff private to your application. These are really private data, and you have to be a bit careful with updating or rebuilding during preview, because some rebuilds can actually clear this data. And obviously if you clean your app, it's going to rebuild it. On the device that won't happen. This directory is persistent. It should persist through installs and updates. You may not always want to use this directory though, because if you want to create a document, because these are really private data, some applications you actually want to create documents that the user could in theory get to in another app. That doesn't happen too much in mobile, but in a few cases it does. In that case you have to use a different directory, but we'll just use data directory for now, and all I do is I add a /state, and this is just the file I save in. It's really just a file name. And so on saving data, what I do is I just write it out, and then I say write text to file. Now what I'm using in this file system, the very basic writing command, and I just give it the path I want to save to, and then the string I want to write. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to use a JSON format. I'm just going to stringify a bunch of data and write this out to the file. Since I'm using JavaScript and I can very easily create objects, this is a very simple way to go. I call it JSON stringify, and you can see I create the object if you see the two braces in there. And then I create my object. And first note, this write text to file is synchronous, whereas when we're loading, we'll do async. These files are tiny, that I'm totally okay with the synchronous API here, because there's no way this should block your device on tiny files. Like this file is going to be tiny. If your file was several megabytes in size, you'd want to use the async API to save it, because it could actually block it. But this size, if this somehow blocks your mobile device, well, then there's something else blocking the device anyways. Okay. Now what data am I writing? I'm writing version 1. Now this is a best practice I recommend anytime you write save files, whether they're text-based, binary-based, or anything. Anytime you persist data to a file, make sure you have a version in there somewhere. The reason why you need this is that eventually you're going to upgrade your app. You're going to store more data in your file. You're going to change the format of this file. And the person who downloads the upgrade on your phone is definitely going to want to use their old data. So you're going to need a way at load time to detect, well, what format is their data in? And the easiest way to do it is have a versioning. There's lots of other ways to do that in text files, but versioning is also very important to say, look, this is the version I want. How old is this? What can I do with it? And the second thing I'm saving my item sets. In the view here we have item sets, and each one of these is called an item set, and I'm storing it in a key called item sets, and then I pass it the result of this save item sets. This sets up the very basic structure for saving data. And that means in the save file, and we can take a look at that, what's in the save file. If you go to build, let's say this is in the build directory now, build local designer fs data state. And you can see right there, version 1, item sets, count 3. Now why is it only count 3? And that's why I set up just the bare bones minimum in this save item sets function down here. You'll see that all I'm saving is the count of the sets. And why does it load actual data when it comes back? Well, we'll get back to that. And so this is saving actual sets. Just the length, and because I didn't want to do the actual saving before the show, I just wanted to set the bare bone minimum. Now back to the loading. When I press this load button here, let's clear this, I press load, what happens? Well, this does clear, it's hard to see, and you'll see it says loading. So it actually got to this loading mechanism here, and now I'm using the file system read text from file. Now if you recall before, down here, and then write text to file, ooh, big marker for now, and another one. Oh, this writing thing's not working on me again. It's kind of annoying. I wonder why that is. Whatever. And the way it goes, let's clear it out. These tools are sometimes annoying. Okay. Oh, and it's back now. Wonderful. Okay. Ignore that. I gotta get used to using this tool a little bit better. It's kind of annoying. The keystrokes tend not to work. It's supposed to be highlighting things in the screen. You saw the one. I don't know why the second one didn't work. In any case, I have this read text from file, and this is actually using the async version now. I think technically this one down here is also async. I just don't check the result. To be honest, I think I'm just ignoring the result. And in this case here, read text from file. I load the file, and I'm using async. Again, this should actually be fast enough. I don't need this, but this realistically, it's simple enough. Let's just do it. Let's just do it asynchronous. And it also gives me a way to get errors. And so the first closure then gives me the contents of the file, and what do I do with those contents? Well, I parse them. If there's an error here, it's going to throw an error and come down to here, and that's okay. Because these are private files, we don't expect errors too often unless we save something broken. And now I'm not actually checking the version here because I don't have any other versions yet. But it's sometimes a good check to say, like, look, if not data.version or data.version is less than 1, you might actually want to write an error here, and I'm just going to write it in the console for now, console.log invalid format, and then just return. Actually, this dot is loading. Or maybe I should throw an exception instead, then return. This is a cleaner way. The purpose of checking version here is that if somehow this file got corrupted in the device, I don't attempt to do something ridiculous. Now, the ridiculous thing is maybe somebody inserted, if the file gets corrupted, the worst thing that can happen is partial corruption. Total corruption is usually okay because your format just broken, but partial corruption is really bad. Say, for example, the count gets modified to like 30,000 or something, or 120. This is going to kill the program if it tries to load this. It's just too large. But if we put a value of like 2, then you can click the load button. Interesting. It didn't load it. What happened here? Well, it didn't write console. Okay, so I put item sets at 2. This should have actually worked. I've been playing around with this the whole time before, and it was working just fine. Loading. Okay, something must be wrong. Okay, well, let's get back to loading. It says, what I checked is if there's a data sets in here, I actually load item to sets. And that means literally if the key item sets is in there, load item sets, data.item sets, and load item sets comes down to here. And if there's no count, I'll say this wrong, if there's no count, it doesn't load anything. Otherwise, it resets the sets and then goes again. But somewhere around here, console.log data, console.dir data, something's going wrong with my reloading. Count of 3. But I clearly have a 2 here. Oh, you know what it is? I pressed the wrong save button again. Sorry about that. I do that again often because I don't use the Mac keyboard very much, and they're mapped funny on this device. So sometimes I press some combination of the S key, which is not the saved version. Okay, now if I load it, you can see it loads 2, and I can load 1. And I forgot to save it again. Now it gets to 1, but let's go back to 3 for a second. We're just going to save this anyways. And now let's change the version to be something broken. Let's change to version 0.5. And now we're going to see the message that it's an invalid file format. And nothing gets changed. Invalid format. We probably want to present this to the user, although this is for me during development a relatively low priority because as long as I've logged it I can see what the issue is, and it's really not something we're expecting to happen on the device. And for a tiny file, does the file format get corrupt in a private data? Unlikely. But it's something you should deal with a full app because it could actually happen. It doesn't have to be like a super big notice, but just something saying, look, we couldn't load data. More importantly, you had to find a default to come back. Alright, it's getting back to the saving. So now, as you see, when I load data, all I do is I check the count now, and I create a new item set, a default set, when I load this. This is obviously silly because this is the old setup. And this is what I mean. Before the show, all I did was save the data. And now we're actually, all I do is save the count just to get the setup. Now we're actually have to go in and save these data sets. What does it look like? What does it look like to save these data sets? What does the format of these dice look like? Reset. And so this will be the substance of what we're showing here. So the setup is the file system, very simple stuff. And now we just have to convert all the item sets into structures. Now, to save item sets, because everything is just JSON serialized, all we have to do is save a count of the item sets. We don't actually have to save the item sets here. What we need to do is we can actually return an array. And so let's create a temporary array for all just item sets. And I always have a hard time coming up with names. Let's call it serial for names and just make an empty set. And then for var I0, I is less than this dot items sets dot length. I guess a for each. Do I have for eaches in here already? For each. There we go. Let's copy a for each. This dot items of for each. Okay. This dot items sets dot for each. And we're just going to add this. We're going to do, I believe it's a push, and set dot. And now we're going to come up with the convention. Here's where you might have in another language, you might have something like iSerializable or something. But since it's a JavaScript, we don't have interfaces. So we might just want to say something like getSaveObject. And let's figure out what it is. And then in the end, all we have to do is return this data set, return ser. It's just a vector of data objects. But now we have to define that data object on the item set. So what does the item set look like? Let's put it near the constructor because this is where actual data is. And we have to define a function called, what did I say again? GetSaveObject. Let's call it getSerialObject instead. GetSerialObject. Maybe get's not so good, maybe create is better, but let's just stay with get for now. Or no, actually I'm going to stick with create. It's hard to say. Let's just stick with get. I don't like get for things that actually do stuff, but it'll be okay. Now, what do we have here in this item set? We have dynamic data. We have this editing and add. These are not things we want to store because this is just for the UI. That disappears. We have items. So what we want to do is we want to return a list of items. And items will start with an empty list. And then we're going to return items. And this is just a key value pair. I think in ES6 we can just do items, but I'm always, it's weird syntax anyways, that the key and value are the same, but it works. And this dot items, we just have to save each of the items now for each item. Now this is going to be the exact same thing. Items.push item.getSerialObjects. Saving is actually a lot easier than loading, but you're going to see this recursive structure. When you have a state, you basically, for everything you need to serialize, you're going to create this getSerialObject function, and that returns the structure for that item. And these items are defined over here. Not here, I mean over here. Okay. Now this is where we have a structure of items. And this is where it gets a little bit more difficult, but we have to save everything. We have the basic thing here. We have our die, our item, and we're going to have the base form. The base form has some data, and the derived one has some data. Now, the question is, how do we do these definitions? This is a large structure of data, and it has to have a definition. How do I want to do that? Usually you want to store IDs. I don't want to store the whole definition. But in this case we could store the definition, but it's really not so nice to store that way. How can we do that? Well, let's do something first just to make sure it's working. Let's do getSerialObject. Do we have anything else? It's going to have a definition, a modifier. It's going to have a type. but the type is stored in the derived class. This is where it gets really weird. Why is it not passed to the base class? Alright, we'll have to fix that as well. The superclass should be taking the type. And the very minimum, we should be storing type this.type. Okay, let's see if we get any errors here. If we save the file, something happened. Undefined. So one of our for eaches is undefined. This.items for each. Oops. Not sure why it's undefined. Oops. I don't know what key it is to go to a line. It's relatively late. The line numbers, unfortunately, because I'm still dealing with a transpiled file, we don't have the mapping set up yet, so I still have to figure out where this is set up. This.item, this is not item sets. This is item sets, isn't it? Okay, so the error is right there, relatively easy. Okay. Save, we get just the message, which is good. Now we can take a look at that file again. Now it has a lot more in it. I wonder if there's a view as. I wonder if I can quickly... Anybody know if Sublime has a quick way to reformat JSON? There's a view here. It's not a very happy view. Where would JSON be in this list? JavaScript, there it is. Okay, I wonder if there's a reformat option. Tools. No idea. Okay, but in any case, you can see the stuff is in there. We don't have to look at the file too much because we know what's in there. So each of the items will write at least the type out. Type. And you see there's 2 item sets and there's 6 things, 6 types because you have 6 dice. And so if we added a modifier and chose save, and there must be a reload option here. I don't know what that reverted. There should have been a modifier written here. Get serial object is not a function. That's a bit weird. Alright, so something went wrong. Get serial object. Aha! Because I put it on die. Notice I didn't put it on item itself, so one of the items, the in modifier, doesn't actually have a serial object. So we're back to the basic bit. Closed. Okay. Now if we save it, it's happy. We go back to state. Now you'll see there's a modifier in there. So we've at least saved the modifier, but we haven't actually saved the data yet. And this is where it starts getting a little bit tricky when you have a hierarchy of types. Okay, let's finish off the saving, how we might want to do this. And because the issue is we can't save these dice here. The definition, we cannot save the definition of this. So somehow we're going to have to store the definition back. We don't need to store an ID. So all the items have an ID, but we don't need this. This is just something, a runtime ID. The save file doesn't need that ID. And the first thing I need to do is say we have a die as a definition. How are we going to store this definition? And this is what I'm really not sure about. How could we actually do that? Static die, static die. And well, let's delegate first of all to the die. This is where it gets really weird. How do we delegate to the die? We're going to do a serialization sucks in English. get serial object. We'll just keep following the same pattern. And all this needs to store is an ID, I think. But it won't be enough. These definitions actually need to have the ID in them. Alright, I didn't think about this enough in advance, but we're going to have to actually stick IDs on those items. Because right now what I want is, if I have a standard die, I just want to stick that into the file and load it back. And we could do it the really cheap way, and let's do the cheap way first. Instead of referring to our static definitions, we're just going to save out these files and pretend that these are just templates. So you might actually have this instead, return, and you can say sides, this dot sides, and name this dot name. And I'll say why this is bad in a second, but I just want to get forward on this. And then for the derived one, get serial object. And then we're going to start with the base class version. So we're going to start with the serial version from the super. Actually, how do you call a base class in JavaScript? Something I've not done before, which is really weird. It's going to be hard to find a reference in ES6. Not prototype, ES6. Anybody know how to do that? Let's do a look at super. This is a good thing. Super. Constructor length, super. Let's see what they have to say about it. Function on parent. Let's see how they do it in a function. Return. Super calling static methods, we don't need that. Super deleting super properties. Well, let's just do the obvious first. Super.get serial object. If anybody knows a good reference for like the modern JavaScript, I'd be very happy, because I keep looking up these things and I'm not. I mean, the Mozilla docs seem to be pretty good, but they don't cover everything. Okay, now I want to add some values to this. I want to say super.color equals color. I'll add those values. I would like to have a merge function here too. I don't know how to merge maps. That'd be another very good one. And so this will at least save the die, so we can save dice. And so we're going to do the same thing here on the die, get serial object. We're going to start with the base of super.get serial object. And set dot, and we're going to say definition now. We're really just going to save this definition equals this dot definition that gets serial object. Because at this point it doesn't care, it just wants to load that serial object. And so let's save that and see what we get in the file. And save that. Any errors? Cannot read property call. Well, that's interesting. What is it calling? Where is it getting a mounted problem of? It's somewhere in here. I'm willing to bet it's in here. What if I... It's probably that call to super. Oops. It's kind of annoying this is on the bottom because I have to close the log every time. Yeah, so that was on... So obviously calling set.super is not okay. Actually want sir here. That can't be it. Set says. Save it. And what do we have? Cannot read property call of undefined. So how do we do that? We call super something. Super dot. Well, here's a static one. Why doesn't that work? Super. I have no reference for it. I have no reference to how to call a super function. JavaScript calls super function. As if there's super functions in there. Let's open these two and see if I can get any reference at all. No, I don't want the prototype method. I want the ES6 method. There's also prototype. I want the ES6 method. Or is it ES5? I don't remember what it's called. Not constructor. Not the super call. Not a super constructor. Wow, it seems to be not done very often, so this is kind of calling parent methods, maybe? This is really weird that I don't get more references to this. Super here is super dot. It just shows it. It just says it works, that one. What does the answer say? Nope. So this is again prototype based, that's no good. So what's the problem here? Super inheritance without super calls, that's fine. These are also prototype based. Don't want prototypes. There must be a way to do this. There must be a way to call parent function. ES5 call parent function, let's call it that. I'm wasting a lot of time looking this up. I thought this would be an easy part. Don't want those. Prototype, prototype, don't want prototypes. No parent function. Prototype based. Right, can we just guess what's wrong here? Why would get serial object not work? Oh, maybe because it's called get serial object. Oh, you should always check for typos, but the error I got, it can't possibly be the error because it's really weird. Color is not defined. Okay, where are we saving color? And we save it in right here. Equals this dot color. Sorry about that. This dot color. Alright, looks like it's saved. I got a bunch of nulls. I must have forgot a return value. Yeah. Cert, return cert. Get serial object. Now I need two things to make this easier before I just go going crazy with this. I'm going to move my debug panel to the top right. It's going to obscure something, but that'll be okay. And so it's up there instead now. And I'm going to move it right outside so it's on top of everything. Whoops. So it's at least right outside everything, and so I can keep the log open. That's the main thing. So if I do this, you can see the log clear go up. And what I'd also like to do is now, for debugging purposes, because it's going to be hard to read state, you can see we have the definitions written in here now, color definition, blah, 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 except it's getting harder to read. There must be a way for JSON stringify to format the data. Stringify format. And space. Number of space characters to use. Alright, it says for readability, so let's just see what readability means in this case. JSON.stringify. Null or undefined, I guess. Yeah, null. Let's put a tab character in there. Go and save the data. And I don't think it saved anything. Just revert it. It should have loaded automatically, but maybe it didn't. Okay, why didn't that work? The replacer parameter, let's see the space parameter. Using a tab character mimics pretty print appearance. Well, apparently it doesn't. It's apparently what I tried to do. Am I on the right function? No. This is one of the things that actually really bugs me about JavaScript. Most functions just don't check their arguments, and this is actually an error on our side. Our write text to file should definitely check its extra arguments. Okay. Now we have pretty printed. Now great. I don't know why pretty prints the arrays this way, but whatever. We can see the items. We have the stuff. Now we have the whole definition in here now. It's going to make it easier to load, but it's a bit of a problem. Let's go back and just finish saving these first. So we save the items. We have Dark Souls dies, fine. And the modifier item, we're going to have to do this as well. Get serial object super.get serial object. I'll call it serial dot modify equals this dot modifier return serial. This should be everything we need. This completely saves our data sets. So that if we have a modifier in here, modifier, change this one to orange as well, this one to D20, then we call save. Now we should see that we have a D20, it has 20 sides, name D20, type and we have a name orange, it has a color on it. You notice saving this, yeah, and you'll start noticing the problem with the way to do it. The type is what we want, that makes sense. And okay, so we've saved this. This file completely defines what we have saved in here. We don't have a number of items, but we have no way to modify that in the UI. So now we have saved data, and I say this was actually, and aside from the weirdness, this is actually the easy part. Saving is a lot easier than loading, because saving you already have a hierarchy of stuff that you want created. Now we want to do loading. Now we have to figure out, well, let's do the reverse. I mean, our load function still just doesn't, defaults to nothing. But now we have to do the opposite. When we load data, we have to figure out what to do with it. And why load data should be here. It should reset the data. I don't know why I didn't reset the data. Data.itemSets. We have an item sets. Why didn't it load? Load should have cleared this and gone back to the default ones. Somehow it didn't reload. Okay, in any case, now the problem here is that we can't just call a new item set here. We have to load an item set, but we don't actually have an object to call it on yet. And because JavaScript isn't typed, you can't just create a second constructor that takes an argument saying serialized. And this is something I might do in other languages. I might have a constructor which takes a serial form and just loads it. But instead we're going to have to create a static function on item set that loads it. So this is going to do something like push, let's say item set dot load object data-i. Now we need a load object function here. This is item set, and we'll put it beside here. And yes, this can be static. And so the item equals var new item. We'll create a new item first. Item set, sorry. But now we actually have items in there. And this is where it starts getting weird because we have to do this whole through the chain, but let's just do sanity check first. Is we're going to say, actually let's just do this first, item set. It's going to take these default items up here and we're just not going to replace it. So it has 2. You don't see anything here because it's loaded 2. If we change this instead to create a new item set, you'll actually see that it's loading. We'll just create just the black die then. And why is it not loading? It's like it's not getting here. It's not getting there. Loading, where is it not getting to? Loading item sets, it gets to there. It's probably not getting there. Okay, why is it, what's the format here? Console.log. What is the count? Plus data.count. Undefined. Oh, yeah, no. Because it's now an array, I don't have a count anymore. I forgot to modify that. Okay. If it doesn't have an, it already has an item sets. We know we're in item sets. This item sets, it has a length. Okay, that should be enough. Okay, and it creates 2 objects. It's created the wrong 2. Why has it not loaded them back? Load object. It's definitely create an object, items, but it didn't take those items. Not this.items, item set.items. What does this even refer to there? I don't know, because we're in a static object. Okay, this is what I wanted to see. We're proving that we're in this function now. But what we have to do now is we actually have to load the proper items. And items are going to have the same pattern to them. They need a static load object, static load object, and it has some data. And let's go back to main. And for each of the items, now this has a list of items. We're going to just reset the items, and this has data. Data.items, because we set it up here for each item. Item set.items.push. It's called an item.load object. Okay, now it's gonna get mad at us over there because this is something horribly wrong. Yeah, now it's mad because this doesn't exist. Something's gone wrong here. To be expected. Now this load object again. Now this is where it gets really interesting because we have a dynamic setup here. How do we decide what to do? And this is one of those weird cases in object-oriented programming where I've never really seen a good paradigm for this. It's always you sort of have to break out of the OOP model of the language and do something different. Of course, we're going to have to say, well, how do we do a switch? We're going to switch on the data type and then call the specific one. How do we do that? Switch. Not that switch. Wow. Nice page. Switch statement. Can we do strings? We can. So what we want to do now is say switch data.type, because we said this defines the type of the thing. And we're going to say if the case is, and what's the first case we have? The first case we have is standard, and that's a standard die. And then we want to do return standard die.load object data. We'll just pass it down to one of the children and say, look, you do this instead. And the next one is Dark Souls. Return Dark Souls die.load object data. And the last one we had is modifier item. Modifier item.load object. Now what happens if it fails? Well, we have no object here. And let's just throw a new exception. Let's just let it break for now. I don't know what's going to happen. We have to deal with this a bit later. Data.type. Now we have to create this load object and all these other functions. The standard die now is, where's our load object? Static load object data. And here, we're going to do something really weird. We're going to call static die also has a load object. And I'm going to call something really weird here because these are private classes, no longer meant to be public. I'm going to call load object impl. It's one of those weird things when you have an actual naming pattern that completely conflicts with another one. There's no real good name to this, so let's just call it impl. And this one will be called load object impl. And the reason for this is because sorry, no, I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to leave it as load object, and the impl has to come somewhere else. We're going to have to call back to the base classes, so let's start with it first. Let's start with standard. We have die. Let's start with standard die first. Load object. The first thing this has to do is it has to create the die equals new standard die, and we're just going to take the definition from the file for now, so we stored it there. And we have to do nothing else here. The standard die has nothing else to it, which makes this rather simple. If you completely ignore what I've been saying before, this actually simplifies this a lot, because I think this is the same thing. Load object data die equals new Dark Souls die, and it's going to fall apart for return die for this one, I think. You know, we might have got incredibly lucky. That complex structure said about calling up may just go away. And var item equals new modifier item. Item.modifier equals data.modifier. Return item. Everything else doesn't need to be stored. Okay, we've completely broken something. So, as I said before, we have that version check, so we can just save garbage in here, and it'll go back to creating its default ones again. Or not. Let's figure out why it's not loading then. it should have loaded it. Somewhere here is not returning the right thing. Return die, return die. Where is it getting to? It gets to this load object, let's say, console.log item load plus data.type. It's not getting to there. Item.load object and debug log. This is item set load plus. There's no debug log. Sorry, I'm using the wrong. Debug log is from Uno. That's what we use for debugging in Infuse itself. Oh, I did use it correct there. Item set load. Well, that's interesting. It got to there. Item.load object. But it didn't get to there. Probably because I don't know how to do statics in JavaScript. I could rename the show to edA-qa Learns JavaScript instead. That might be very helpful since I seem to forget half of these things. Again, anybody who's watching that knows a bit of JavaScript can always just key in and let me know how to do these things. Static method name. This does static method. This does static method. That works. That works. Apparently this is supposed to work. It's just supposed to work the way we did it. So the question is, why doesn't it work? Why do we have in main, I can call item dot load object. And it's obviously failing at that point. It's throwing some random exception, which I'm not getting. Alright, this is actually, yeah. The problem I have is this one here. If we have right here, I'm going to do error. And I'm going to print it out this because we have an error here and we're just hiding it here. This is actually our thing hiding it. Or not. Wow. Why is this not working? I don't know where this error is going to. There's some error happening here, and let's just do it. Item is not defined. Okay. Now, very curiously, this is something I've never liked about promises, and it's always bugged me. It had bugged me a lot in Angular, and it's just I'm never quite sure where you're supposed to handle exceptions. And so I'm going to stick it right here and show the error, and because clearly what we're missing here was the error. Something was swallowing it, and I'm going to put a to-do here because I don't think we should swallow this. I don't know whose fault this is. Should not need this catch, but error was swallowed. Okay, now we have an item is not defined. Okay, and now I understand the problem. See, once you see it, I understand exactly what the problem is. So we look at item.load object. It's because item is defined in items. Items that item.load object. Okay, now we've loaded it, which is good. Okay, we have some errors. A bit of a problem here. But it loaded the correct one, but the normal one, it didn't quite load. And what was that? The die definition die dot standard die. The standard die appears to be broken, and it had an error with that. And it probably has to do with the way we load the object, because when we save the object, we just save the definition. And the definition has sides. But what's missing then? Num sides. Num sides. Where is number sides coming from? Num sides is right there. Okay, now I understand. We have to have a load here as well. And this is where it becomes super annoying. Because all these static definitions have to be loaded as well. Because when I serialize the definition, I just serialize these values. When I load this back, I actually have to add these functions as well, but then it's not a proper thing. It needs to be a proper function, and now we're going to have to actually distinguish these dies and what their ID is. And so these all have a name, and we're going to have to do this with ID as well then. Okay. Well, let's do it this way. Let's create one big item of all the stuff we have. What I need is a map between IDs and what's being actually stored. And so I'm going to say all dice, and then standard dice for each. How did I iterate before that I got the key out of this as well? For M in object, that's what it is. For var key in standard dice. Standard dice key.id equals key. I'm going to do this way, and all dice, oh, this is an object, key equals standard dice key. This does two things, and you'll notice a pattern a lot in my demos. We have to give these things IDs, but I don't want to duplicate code. So I'm going to create them normally without an ID, and then I'm going to stick the ID in this way. And now I also have one giant map of all of them. And let's actually create a function, add dice set. And we'll put that in here. It's in the set. Let's call it dice object so we know what it is. Dice set. It's an object type, but dice set. Dice, add dice, Dark Souls dice. Okay, so for all these dice, I'm going to end up, all these objects created are going to have an ID with them as well. And they're going to be stored in this all dice structure. So we have both of them here. And then when we load a die, we can put it on the die here, static die, static load object data. Then we're going to do load all dice data.id. And instead of here, we're just going to say id this.id. The loading is going to break on us now because something's really wrong here. Okay, but when I load these things, I have to do it differently as well. Load object, and I'm loading the definition in the die. Load object import. Okay, and this is where I say this definition gets a bit trickier. Not quite. We can still cheat a bit here. Let's do static die.load object. Die.load object. Data definition. Again, these two don't care how they're loading. They both use the base class because they don't care. They don't want to know what they're loading. This one's expecting a Dark Souls die, but doesn't really care. And because the definition goes to constructor, we create it that way. And now it's probably really going to start whining at us about something wrong. Yeah. Okay. Save it, because I was loading a corrupted file, so something weird happened. Now if I load it, well, it almost worked. I get a 9 here. Not entirely certain which one of these is broken, but looks like the first one. Actually, no, something else is weird. Okay. But in any case, we came pretty close to getting it working, so let's see what I have here. Now these console logs we don't need. Whoops. And in the main file, we can get rid of the other console log. We know we're loading the sets. Now we have to figure out where that NAND is coming from. If something is going wrong here. And what is going wrong? But wait, what we did now is what I changed is that this static die, and static die is just the static dice definition. And when it saves itself, all it does is it saves its ID to the file. It says, this is just my ID. So if we look at the state file, definition just ID is D8. And the Dark Souls ID is orange. And so that's why it doesn't care. It's saving a color still, which we should get rid of. But actually, the Dark Souls die, we don't even need to get serial object because the superclass can do that entirely. And when we load it, we're looking for that ID in the all dice, and the all dice is created down here. And this structure is the ID mapping of all the dice to their objects, which means these IDs now have to be unique. And we still want the groups because they're dependent, but in the actual saving, we're just making one big set of unique dice. But now we still have something missing here. One of our expected value calculations is going wrong. But let's save the cell again. Let's go here. If we load it, it's fine. Then we save it with our new format. And we look at the state. We have items, and the first item is, in the item set, has 2 items. And it has a standard die, a D8, and a Dark Souls die, and it's orange. Actually, let's add a modifier to this as well, so we can, this here, that's what's missing, is the modifier. Aha. Okay. The modifier is incomplete. You notice it's missing some value here. So if I load it, there's something wrong with the modifier. So let's go down to the modifier. Load object item.modifier equals data.modifier ser.modified. Yeah. And again, we're probably going to add support for like a higher level JavaScript at some point as well, because this type of error I had just here is one of my biggest complaints about untyped languages, is that you type the wrong key and nothing goes wrong. You get no warnings, it just randomly doesn't work. And there's really no way around that. And so let's fix this and save it. And save it. And if we load it, now it loads. So, and if you don't believe me, it loads, we can remove this. And we can remove this and then just go back to load, and we get back to where we were. So now we're actually loading everything that we want. We have the 2 data types and the static file. The static data is not stored, So our static data just stores an ID. That's what it does here. And the dice here, and make a note here, a mapping of all static definitions to their definition. In serialization, we just store the ID. I've never really accounted for yet what happens if there's something wrong in the loading. We're just going to get garbage in here. And as much as I dislike the untyped Java, it does give me this advantage that I can basically just ignore it. You're going to get a garbage item in the display, but since we're not expecting the file to be corrupted, we can leave that for now, and I can add probably the safety functions to that in another episode or offline, because adding the safety is really not so much fun. You just add a bunch of exception handling and then decide where you want to do it, how you store the data. Maybe for another show, but if you're interested in seeing how we deal with corrupted data beyond what I did cover in version, just let me know and I can do another show on that. Otherwise, I'll just accept the file's okay for now. And so now we have all these dice being stored, and for each item we save it, so it's very dynamic. Now the one thing that's really missing is in this display here, we have no way of removing these entire items or creating a new one. Creating a new one, and just a second, I have to check for somebody. I'm expecting some post. Just give me half a second here. Alright, sorry about that. So what I want is some way to add new sets, because we have this all saved, and so that's pretty good for what we've done so far, but let's quickly add a way to save a set. To add a new set, and then we'll leave it at that for that show. But the main thing we need for adding a set is we need to have somewhere in the stack panel at the very end, and I'm going to make an ugly button first of all. Well no, let's take this plus button here. Where did that come from? This came from dice set, and let's copy that for now. I don't have a class for it. I'm going to modify it quite a bit. It's coming from font awesome, so it should be a button. We should really create a class for this, but I don't like creating classes when I only have 2 of something, so let's just do it this way for now, because this is actually right away I had to change something. Stack panel alignment equals center, orientation equals horizontal. I'm going to say add new set. We'll keep the same add. New set. Font size equals 25. We're still using the classes for that. So we'll keep the same font. Stack panel. Spacing equals 5. And oh yeah, this has to go inside this stack panel. Hit test mode, hit test mode. There we go. So now there's a new set there. Oh wait, that's what I want to do is whatever, I'll fix the design after. I forgot that this plus sign is not a plus sign in Font Awesome. It's actually the outline of it. So actually what I want is to do the inverse of it. So let's just get rid of this. Let's just say this instead. Let's say panel color equals color primary. And just get rid of the Font Awesome part. Means I also don't need an orientation. No, I item spacing, and that's the wrong color. Where are my colors again? Which color did I want? Color primary text is what I need. Color primary text. Wonderful. Bit ugly, but I'll patch that up later. We don't need to look at that now. Then we just have to implement add new set, because if I click it now, it's just going to create a bunch of problems for us. It's supposed to be creating problems for us, because it's clicked, it goes add new set. Might just do nothing. Okay, well, let's find out. Let's go above the stuff. Let's go near the top here. The main state, add new set. This dot item sets dot push new item set. I have a feeling it was loading them, and it was just not updating the display, which is bad. So you can see it's creating new ones, and let's load the old stuff we had first though. Okay. Before save, so we can now add a new one, and load you can clearly see it goes back. But if we save it now we should see 3 item sets in here. In our save file, items sets, 3 item sets. Okay. And this gets the next problem. I think it's enough for this episode though. We covered the basics of serialization, and I can continue on this next time, because what we really have to show next time is you've never seen a save button in a mobile app, right? I mean, they're just not there. No load button. We have to decide, when do we want to save this information? And you can't just save continuously, and you don't actually want to save every time data changes. This also becomes a problem. There has to be key points where you decide, okay, I want to save this, I want to save this, and this strategy can become really difficult. And I think we'll look at that next time. In between time, I'll quickly fix the design of this, and unless somebody wants to see it, I can deal with some of the error handling and just show it next time. And then we'll deal with how you deal with when to save it, how to save it, and this has to do with the life cycle management, and also just when you're like, when the user presses, for example, new set. Anytime they add a new set, or anytime they modify something, or the set goes, you want to save the data. And you have to find these key trigger points. But let's do that next time. And I say, if you have anything you want to cover until next time, let me know. The next stream should be next Monday at 3 again. And on Friday, I will be doing probably a Leaf stream for algorithms. I'm not decided what algorithm. Maybe binary search. Let me know if you have any preferences. And I thank you for watching today. I'll save this again, all the GitHub in the whatever format it's in right now. I'll save it and push it up there so you can have a look at it. And thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to my Twitch channel to catch me next time, and also follow me on Twitter or on Facebook if you like to use that. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.